Shepnaz Podcast begins now.
Welcome to the Shepnaz Podcast. I'm Joe, and I'm your host today. And today we have with us Pastor Nick, and we're going to talk a little bit about his message from this past Sunday. While we were starting the Exodus series here in Gahanna, also they were starting the Exodus series in Johnstown, and Nick was kind of preaching on the same passage, but both Rob and Nick have their own little take on some of the things. So we thought we would bring Nick in. If you've noticed the past couple weeks, we've taken his message and split it up over a couple days, but we thought, it'd be nice just to have you come in and we'd talk about it.
Give a little more personal address. Sure.
Yeah. Well, you've been busy up there. How are things going in Johnstown?
Oh, really good. Yeah, really good. A lot of good things happening. We're seeing some cool things happen on Sunday mornings, but even outside of Sunday mornings too. Just a lot of encouraging things where people are, taking their next step towards Jesus in a lot of different ways. And so just very encouraged about that, how God's working in and through his people, and excited for what's to come. We're kind of entering as many people listening probably are feeling too, just like the newness of school starting and getting kind of back into some rhythms that this time brings, and the busyness that it brings as well. So actually I had a sermon on that a couple weeks ago about the busyness.
I remember that, called At His Feet.
Yeah.
In case you want to go back and check that out, right. That is posted at shepnaz.org/media, and you can check that out. There's also resources that go along with that, devotionals and some study guides and things like that. So, well, this past week, you got to kind of introduce the Exodus series.
That's
and
right.
Maybe give us a little bit of behind the scenes, because for some people, they might wonder, how does this work? That, you and Pastor Rob kind of get together and figure out how the preaching schedule and what you're going to do and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So, this is kind of like part of a larger discussion, like of what we mean and what it looks like to be one church, but multiple locations. And so the things that we talk about, like what is it that keeps us connected as a church, one church? And one of those things being the preaching and the sermon series, that it's important to us that we're at least participating in the same series. It's maybe not going to be the exact same, but where both campuses are kind of oriented around the same texts and ideas. So that's one thing that kind of was a starting point for us. And then through that, we develop what's this going to look like? How many weeks is it going to be? What's the kind of the central idea? And sometimes that's a idea or topic, or sometimes that's a book. And so a book of the Bible. And so this series is Exodus. And so we kind of started with that, and we go back and forth of, hey, what's the first couple weeks going to look like?
Yeah.
Or we don't have it mapped out necessarily from start to finish. I would love that probably. But I think Pastor Rob, is not as maybe concerned about it as I would be. Like, where's this going and how long is it going to be? And so it's a little bit of, we'll see how it unfolds. And so I kind of take his lead with that, of kind of setting kind of the big picture. There's some collaboration, but I kind of look to him, hey, what are we doing next? Or what are some of the ideas? And so he opens it up for, response to that is, what are you thinking in this? And so that's kind of a starting point for us, and then we get into it. And so, we're going to focus on chapter 1 of Exodus this week. So we go into it, and then we look it over. We share notes and things that resources that we come up with, and kind of go at it and see what God is speaking, because they are different sermons, but there's some overlapping ideas and points and thoughts. So it's just kind of different perspectives with those. So
yeah, for those that aren't aware, it's not as though Rob writes a sermon and then gives you the notes and you preach off of Rob's notes.
Right. Some people might think that's how.
Right. So you guys are talking about, hey, we're going to maybe talk about this topic or this passage of scripture, and then you kind of go to your separate corners, and you might compare notes along the way, but you're actually...
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I definitely appreciate that, him sharing the resources like that. So,
well, speaking of resources, over the summer, we did a lot of updates on the mobile app. And I just kind of wanted to remind people that on every week now, if you open the Shepnaz mobile app, you'll see that there's an area for the Gahanna campus, the Johnstown campus, and whatever's going on that day, there's accompanying message notes and devotionals and things that are going along with the message that is happening at the campus that you're attending. Yeah. And also, you can go to the website later if you don't happen to have the mobile app. You can go to shepnaz.org/daily, and those are daily resources, and you'll see ones that'll say Pastor Nick resources. You'll see one that says Pastor Rob resources, and you can follow resources that go along with the message that you heard.
Very helpful tools out there. So
you get into Exodus 1, and I think one of the things that you kind of started with on Sunday, and if you could kind of touch on this a little bit, kind of the context of this book and its authorship, and kind of how it plays out in comparison to the other books.
Yeah, that was kind of the big, like, we got to get this, understand this part of it, like the context, because it kind of sets up the rest of the series in a way, like understanding the zoomed out view of this. And so that's kind of what we started with, that the book of Exodus is really part of the series, the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. And with that, when I was working through this and studying, it's when you zoom that view out and understand it in that context, it's a continuation of Genesis and the story that's unfolding there, about God and creation, and then interacting with his creation, humanity. And so all of that is unfolding in Genesis, and then it rolls right into Exodus. And so we understand that. And when we do that, when we take that zoomed out view, one of the threads that's woven throughout that story is kind of what I focused on Sunday. Was, in Genesis, we see a God who makes promises, keeps promises, and is faithful to keep his promises. Like, that's the thread that's woven, that's tying together those first 5 books. And really the larger part of Scripture too.
Sure.
But certainly the first 5 books of the Bible, and that's kind of what where we started with.
And I'm kind of in a unique position in that I have a small group that meets on Sunday evenings, and half of our small group is from the Johnstown campus, and half of our small group is from the Gahanna campus. So when you guys are on the same topic, a lot of times we'll do sermon-based small groups, and so we get to kind of compare notes, and we do this balancing act of the different things that are discussed between the two. One of the things that you guys both touched on is how Exodus is just a continuation of Genesis, even in the language and how it starts.
Right. Yeah, that was one of the things, through the study. I didn't know this off the top of my head, Joe, but one of through the studying commentaries and different things like that was, I think maybe Rob mentioned this too, but like the beginning of Exodus starts in the Hebrew starts with "and," the word "and." So like that's one of the context clues of the continuing story when Genesis 50 ends, and then it goes into Exodus 1, starting with "and." It's like, oh, that's your clue that this is what has come before this is important. So,
and kind of give us a little bit of background with the family as we're looking at when Exodus 1 opens, we're presented with this problem that the Israelites are in Egypt, and Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, is noticing, hey, they are to the point where these foreigners now outnumber us.
We're getting a little uncomfortable here.
And they're very worried that if especially he's thinking through strategies, and he's thinking, well, if one of our enemies started to come at us, probably these people would join forces with them.
The numbers are not in our favor.
We would be in bad shape.
Yeah, and that was part of God's promise, right? I mean, that was the key, that God would bless the people of Israel. That was his promise to Abraham, that I'll make you a great nation with many descendants, as many stars in the sky and grains of sand on the shore. That's how your offspring will be. And so these generations go by, and it's unfolding right before us in this Exodus text, where we're seeing God's promise come true, where the people of Israel are becoming so numerous to the point where now it's uncomfortable for other people, the Egyptian people. And so that's what we're seeing unfold.
So give us some context of how they ended up there in the first place. How was it that the Israelites, as we know them, the nation Israel, how is it that they're growing and they're in Egypt?
Yeah, God told them to. I mean, in a short way, that's what I alluded to on Sunday during the message. Like, those are their own sermon series of like what led up to this point in Exodus. But essentially, the people of Israel, Joseph was already in Egypt because a number of things happened. If you're familiar with the story, he was sold into slavery and then made his way to Egypt, and rose, helped Pharaoh out with a few things, and then was put into charge of over all the land of Israel. And so Joseph was there while the rest of his family was not there, back in the Promised Land. And so what was happening in the Promised Land, where the rest of his family was famine. And so through all of those events, the invitation is given by Pharaoh to, hey, bring your family here to live in Egypt. And God spoke to Jacob, go to Egypt. I will go with you. So do not be afraid. And so that's what happens. They go and bring the family, and it was 75 in total, 70, 75. They go to Egypt, and that's what happens. And they multiply and multiply and multiply through those generations, and just become numerous, as the text says, too numerous.
I was thinking, as I was driving in this morning, I was thinking about the generations from the time of the promise to when it started actually manifesting. And, we hear the names, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then Joseph, and those generations. And when I put it into personal context, like it's pretty amazing. Because I think just a couple weeks ago, we were celebrating a birthday in our family, and I'm thinking we had that many generations in one room. Like the great grandma was there, the grandma, the mom, and the daughter or son, and we had 4 generations all in the same room, sitting around a table. And to think that when we're talking about Joseph inviting everyone to come down to Egypt, because he had already been down there, and this was going to be a way to provide for the family because of the famine in the land and everything, that's how close it was between the time when God told Abraham, I'm going to make you into a nation, to the time that this started happening in Egypt. Now, I don't know that they ever actually got to be in the same room, because, of course, Abraham's children started much later in life. So I don't know if
a decent amount of time between.
So I don't know if the timeline would have worked out, but it's still the same number of generations.
Yeah, we can relate to it a little bit when you put it in that. So when you read through it, you're just like, oh, yeah, these. But when you think about it in your own kind of context, like you just described, it's like, oh, we could see that, and it makes it a little bit more personal and relatable. So,
and also I keep in mind, you had mentioned on Sunday that oftentimes in Scripture, for those that are maybe new to Scripture, or you're just kind of getting into study now, the name Israel, as we know as the nation Israel, and maybe in this time period, when you're talking about a group of the Jewish people, we refer to them as Israelites.
Yeah.
But it came from a name change, which is something that...
Not confusing at all.
Right. I mean, it's interesting because that seems to be a moniker that from time to time God chooses to employ. You know, when he's setting aside someone, oftentimes he's like, okay, this is going to require a name change. Yep. I don't know. There's probably a whole different discussion and study, maybe.
Yeah, that's another series. Yep. You can write these down.
Yeah, because I even think as far as, even if you go into Revelation, I think there's a discussion about being given a new name that was written on a stone. So yeah, there's probably a whole sub-study there. But in this particular case, Jacob, who by all intents and purposes was a rascal in his own right, especially when he was younger, his name is changed to Israel. And that because he's going to be the father of the Jewish nation. And his sons form what we know of as the tribes of Israel. And sometimes when you look at the listing of tribes names, you don't see Joseph's name.
Right.
Even though that is one of the 12, there's this weird thing where like Joseph got split up into two half tribes. That like, we're not going to get into all that, but
it's another series.
But as they're now finding themselves in Egypt, this isn't that generation. In fact, we're far removed from this at this point. It's now been 400 years.
Yeah, where it says the new Pharaoh came into power and to whom Joseph meant nothing. So all that good relation, you know, we talk about Joseph kind of doing Pharaoh a solid and helping him out with a few things, and that's come and gone. So now there's none of that positive relationship happening. It's what we read now, a threat that the people of Israel are to this new Pharaoh, and they attempt to deal with that threat. So
now, as the Pharaoh is now trying to figure out how to deal with it, what is the solutions that he's coming up with?
Yeah, so first attempt is like, well, let's, there's a lot of them. Let's just put them into slave labor. We'll put slave workers over them and force them to do some harsh physical labor, build cities and different things. So that's their first attempt. But then it says, the text is like, but the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied. So, well, let's try something different. And so that's when I said, let's kill all the baby boys. We'll first have the Hebrew midwives do it as they're helping with the childbirth. If it's a baby boy, just take care of it. Well, if you read through the story, it said, no, we fear God, not Pharaoh, so we're not going to do that. And so God rewards them with their own kids, and they become even more numerous. So, and this was kind of what I was leading through all throughout the sermon, is that God's faithfulness is still to his promise, is still on display all throughout this story. And then it's like, well, since that's not working, we'll just have everybody, if you see a baby boy, a Hebrew baby boy, throw him into the Nile River. And so this oppression takes place, and I would imagine for the people of Israel, it'd be something they are wrestling with. And these are horrible things, right? These are horrible things that are taking place just on the surface level. But that's kind of what we brought out during the message, but even on a deeper level, zoomed out view, like the people of Israel even us today, as we're reading through this, are bothered by what we're reading, not just because of the things like the horrible things, slavery and murdering of innocent babies, but God's promise that we kind of laid out is now seemingly like, what's going on? This is part of the promise, especially when we establish God told Jacob, like, don't be afraid to go to Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so this messes with just us, and that's kind of what we brought about on Sunday, was like the assumptions that we have as God's people are challenged here in the text.
Well, I know originally when we had talked about doing this episode that we were going to try to get into the whole debunking the prosperity gospel.
Right.
And I really want to get into that,
Yeah.
but I think it's going to have to wait till tomorrow.
Yeah.
But we're going to talk about the fact that God specifically, as you said, told Jacob, take your family down there. And I believe it's in Genesis either 46 or 47, where
46.
he specifically says, this is where I'm going to grow you into this nation.
I will make you a great nation there.
There. Yeah, not after I get you out of there. It's like, that's the place
So I go, all right.
where I'm going to do it.
All right.
That is an interesting
Life's good
thought.
then. Yeah.
All right, well, we'll leave it there for
Sounds
today. And maybe that's a little bit of a teaser for tomorrow. The idea that God was sending them to a place where he knew there was going to be some struggles, but that's where he was going to grow them regardless. In the meantime, you can go to shepnaz.org and check everything that's going on at the church. Also, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. For Pastor Nick, I'm Joe. Have a great day. This podcast is a production of the Shepherd Church of the Nazarene, Gahanna, Ohio. Email to podcast@shepnaz.org and let us know what you think.